The Nobel Prize for Literature is hereby awarded to Samuel Beckett.
Catastrophe.
Well, hi, everybody. How are you today? This is Mark Chaffardini. Thank you so much for coming back to the Go See Talk podcast experience. We are thrilled, delighted, beyond excited to speak to Oscar-winning director James Marsh. James, thanks for being on the show. How are things in your world?
Pretty good, actually. As you can see, it's a nice sunny day. I'm in Copenhagen, Denmark, in Europe. So, and all is well here. Thank you very much for asking.
Super. I have to ask a question right off the bat. How is life being an Oscar winner? Does it open doors to, the premier tradesmen? Do you get the best crumpet makers coming to set to offer teas and cakes? Like what doors does being an Oscar
None of
winner
those
open?
things. What I get is people like you thinking that life is great. Well, I mean, it does make a difference. Certainly initially, I mean, I won an Oscar for a documentary, which is not quite the same as winning it for a dramatic film. But certainly it's a nice honor to have. And it does, I think, certainly for a few years, leave you with more work you can do. And that, in a sense, that's the definition is to be able to make more work and, to one film to lead to the next film. And so that does help that process. And I guess it's the only sort of globally acknowledged or recognized film award there is. I mean, there are many others out there that have a equal status, if not more, potentially more value perhaps to the filmmaker, but that one is the one that's recognized the world over. One interesting aside to that, maybe to close the issue down, is that I lived in America for a long time, and as I was leaving America and I had a green card, I asked to my lawyer about, well, should I give my green card up or should I keep it? And he said, well, I would keep it if I were you, not unless you've got a Nobel Prize. He said, well, I've got an Oscar actually. So he said, those are the two things that getting a green card immediately. So that there's the answer to your question. That's what it allows me to do, is get a green card straight away, along with a Nobel Prize, which Samuel Beckett has, of course.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of I was being facetious. It is kind of a fun grapefruit to start the question with, the interview off with.
I took it seriously, so I answered it in a serious way, which maybe wasn't what you.
Fair enough. Well, I have to commend you on this. I was spellbound both in the simplicity of this and both the density. I think there's a line in the movie. I mean, look, my notes, I don't usually take notes during films. I try to process it organically, but every couple minutes, I was spellbound by what Neil Forsyth had written. And there's a line I'm going to steal directly from the movie. It's like, we were working with gold. All we needed to do was polish it. So I feel like that speaks to both the professionalism and the exposition of the story with your direction. So I guess, what was that like working with such great material? And did you have to do much?
Well, it was good material, and the thing about good material is you need great actors to make it come to life. I read the script during the pandemic, which was an interesting time to read a script about Samuel Beckett when we're all cut off from each other, which is the condition often of his characters in his work. But for me, the script was the starting point. I had to firstly find the right main character or main actor to play Beckett, and indeed create an ensemble around that actor. And so that for me was the great sort of way of making the film, was taking a script that was in pretty good order and then bringing great actors to that script. And obviously the first and main part of the casting was casting Gabriel Byrne as Samuel Beckett. Now, Gabriel doesn't look a whole lot like Samuel Beckett in the kind of cliche of Samuel Beckett, but his interpretation of it, his understanding of the character, the inner life of that character was really special. So once I'd cast Gabriel, that unlocked a whole kind of way of doing it for me, knowing that I had the actor I really wanted. It was the only actor I ever thought of for this. It was like when I'm reading the script, that's who I want to play it. And we spoke and we got on and found a lot of common ground creatively. And then I was able to build around Gabriel. Aidan Gillen came to play James Joyce, and that's a really interesting sort of performance. There's a young Beckett in the film played by a young Irish actor called Fiona O'Shea. You have Sandrine Bonner, who's a very brilliant French actress, to play Beckett's wife, who was indeed French. So that the script was great, and the actors, I think, made it special. Certainly when we're doing it, all seemed to come to life very well with their talents and abilities.
Well, I kind of felt a deep loss when James's character fell from the story, and because like you said, Aiden did such an amazing job. There's a line where he says, "Is it banishment or dumplings?" So I'm wondering, have you been given an ultimatum like that, or have you given that to somebody else?
Well, no, but I'm going to. Let's put it this way. It's a very good way of saying, well, you can have this or you can have that, And dumplings being, if you're Irish, perhaps, or even British, you might be very tempted by the dumplings option. I'm actually not, to be honest. I might prefer banishment as opposed to dumplings, but it's not something I've used yet. But it's one of those things that's in your repertoire now. So I mean, the issue is, just to let people know, that young Beckett is trying to empty the mind of James Joyce. He's going there to try and understand how to be a writer like James Joyce's. And Beckett, Joyce's wife, gives him this ultimatum, essentially saying, well, you have to take my daughter dancing or you shall be banished. So that's, anyway, so sorry to ramble on there. So to answer your question, I have not used it yet, but I'm going to.
Yeah. And you get to play the Oscar. I'm Hollywood royalty now. I'm going to play that card, right?
Yes, exactly. I can say, and yeah, that's something I can use to discipline people when they misbehave. But I'm not sure the reward is quite what most people want. If you've had an Irish dumpling, it's a kind of stodgy, sort of fatty, sort of off cut, and it's not particularly alluring in a gastronomical sense.
Well, maybe I'm in the U.S. I'm in Texas. Maybe we could say banishment or Whataburger. So it's a famous
There you
fast
go.
food chain.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you mentioned building things around Gabriel's character, and so one of the standout parts of the film is where he struggles conversing with himself. So he has a dialogue which is very introspective. So two questions I have is, how was that your first experience and his first experience doing that sort of double take? And then two, do you have similar introspective discussions with yourself to try to remedy creative hurdles or direction for film?
Well, certainly. And in fact, when I began to understand, we should just explain quite briefly. In the film, we see Gabriel Byrne's character, the real Samuel Beckett, sort of enter into this liminal space, and he has a dialogue with himself, essentially. So Gabriel plays the other Beckett, as we call him in the scripts. There's two Becketts, and they're reviewing his life really through the lens of his mistakes. And to try and understand that in a psychological sense, is a good way of making it work for yourself. So I have, and most people have, I think, inside their head, a critical voice, a judgmental voice, something that kind of filters you a bit, and you sort of talk a bit to that, or that critical voice talks to you. So I felt that this other Beckett character embodied that critical voice that's in my head. Now, maybe I need to get some help on that, but maybe we all have a version of that. It seems to me that we probably do. You can tell me if you do. But certainly I do have that critical voice in my head. It's kind of one that's there to daily torment me and tell me off and to let me know that I've let myself down and to judge you. And that's what this sort of idea is, I think, in a psychological terms. It's made real in a dialogue with himself. But that's what I think it is ultimately in a psychological sense, is that inner voice that I definitely have that tells me off and enlightens me at times. And the question now is, do you have one of those? And if you don't, then I'm alone in this. Then
I most certainly do. Everybody has that imposter syndrome, regrets, second
exactly.
guessing.
That's exactly right. Those elements you've itemized are exactly what that character is sort of doing in a way, second guessing, judging, provoking, criticizing, saying you've let yourself down. That's sort of what that vehicle is in the story. And I think it works quite well. And certainly Beckett in real life, as a character, was haunted by regret and guilt and shame, in a very sort of inhibiting kind of way. And he wrote a lot about it too, not just in his work. So we know that is a sort of factor in his sort of character, is to be very self-critical. And it makes the film very unsentimental. It's like, well, guess what? I've made mistakes, and these are the ones I've made. And normally they're to do with people that I was in relationships, but I didn't honor them the way that I should have done. So that's sort of the flavor of it. But I should also say it's not an earnest academic film. It's more playful than it is sort of intellectual, I hope. Well, that was our intention anyway.
Yeah. Well, playful is kind of an understatement because you're seeing James or Samuel throughout his life. I think that the film setting it in a young age seems chronologically appropriate, but just that first scene where he's reciting a poem and the sort of banter between his mother and young Samuel, always so clever, she says, it sort of sets the tone that he was, he wasn't off, but she might not have been right, especially the follow-up where, of course, you read it's you because you think the whole world is you. And it's it's like two gunfighters, but using words instead of
Well, again, that's
weapons.
all kind of fairly autobiographical. We know that he had a complicated relationship with his mother, who was quite an unpredictable and quite volatile character who suffered a bit from depression. So she goes up and down. And that relationship, he writes about it. And it's one that's sort of key to the film's version. You start with his mother, and that's a complicated. She judges him. She doesn't want him to be a writer. She wants him to be a lawyer. The usual stuff. He wants to only be a poet. Well, fine, do that in your spare time. Go and study to be a lawyer or a doctor. So there was all that friction early on, and he has quite troubled relationships with women generally throughout his life. And he's a terrible person by any means at all. He's very self-aware about his own shortcomings. And he managed to kind of get a situation towards the end of his life where he's got a mistress and a wife, both of whom know about each other. Both of them aren't particularly thrilled about it, but there's a kind of triangle that just about works. But that causes him a great deal of guilt too. He knows that he's going to let one of them down. So starting with his mother and her harshness to him, and the fact that she sort of wanted to confine him and trap him, is the starting point for our story. That friction, that rebellion, if you like, against his mother.
Well, was it intentional or factual that Barbara seemed to become a surrogate of his mother towards the end? I mean, there's a line, and I have to read it so I get it right, where both Samuel and Barbara say, "I owe everything to you." Coming from Samuel, it's one way. When Barbara says it, it's completely different meaning.
Well, that actually would be Suzanne, his wife. Barbara's his mistress. Sorry to be factually,
Whoops.
but don't worry. I get the point. No, that I don't sure how factual that is, but I do know that I mean, Suzanne died before him, as you see in the film. Well, people die in films all the time, so I kind of spoilt it. But and I think that the fact of her death created a lot of soul searching for him. But he did acknowledge the fact that she was the most important person in his career, because she stood by him when he was just a kind of scribbler in his bedroom. And so she also hustled for publishers. She hustled for deals. She managed to, as you saw in the film, she manages to kind of get money out of translations that he can do. So she's like his agent in a way, but a very active one and a very sort of loyal one. So that relationship is complicated, but it doesn't lack love, I think, and reciprocation. But of course, it's complicated because he has other women, which she knows about, and she's obviously not very happy about.
Well, as evidenced by be kind in your review, we have a tax bill to turn in December.
Well, indeed, that kind of thing. But that sort of, it's a playful version of how she hustled for him. And he's a shy person. He's not an extrovert. He's not someone who puts a great deal of stock in his own work, but she did. And she valued it in a way before anyone else did. But she saw she saw how revolutionary it was, I think. And so that support, that emotional support and that practical support is key to his authorship. And he acknowledges that and feels guilty about it too.
Well, from a creative perspective, so I'm getting the names right. So Barbara, there's a line where Sam speaks to Barbara where he says, "I'm glad you're leaving while the kite is in the air." And I take the meaning in the film, but I'm trying to spin it creatively. Is there a point where you step away from something because, touching it anymore is going to be, this is maybe the best the film can be. This is the best the scene can be. You don't want to mess with perceived perfection. Have there things you've stepped away from for fear of making, diminishing returns, anything like that?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's a good question. I think it's something you're trying to do before you shoot anything is to understand, what you need to have and what you don't need to have. Um, so if that's the question, what do you embrace and what do you reject? And sometimes I think, less is more, particularly in a film like this. And the audience can do a bit of work for you, and they kind of want to as well, I think. And something I do as a viewer, I like to do a little bit of work and put things together a bit. So I think, the emotional life of the film is quite stripped back, but and understated. But between the gaps in the words, there's a lot going on. I think the actors really caught that very well. So I think, I embraced it for what it is. And of course, when you get a script, you do work with the writer a bit and you change a few things and you sharpen it a bit and you cut things and you work things. But again, this was Neil's sort of, Neil's script. And so I respected it. It was good enough to be respected.
Well, I'm sure there are probably too many takeaways to mention, but what are you the most proud of? I mean, I was looking at the scene where Samuel was wrestling with himself. It seemed like in a rocky cavern. Some of the sets, the old dance halls, I'm imagining their sets, or even when Alfie and Sam are in a basement, it looked like it was an actual location, not a set. What are you visually the most proud of,
That's a
to
really nice
capture and
question
put
to
together?
Well, there are two answers to that question. In terms of the scenes that you most enjoyed shooting, for me, it was the scenes between Sandrine and Gabriel. I really enjoyed. Say enjoyed. They were kind of nasty scenes often, or sharp, mean scenes between them. But to see two great actors explore something together and work off of each other and improve and refine what they were doing, that was a joy to see two great actors doing that. And I really enjoyed, you just sit back and you just enjoy, you think, well, this is great. This is really interesting to watch. So that's something I really enjoyed as I was shooting the film. And when you get to the cutting room, there's certain things you spend a lot of time doing that are quite difficult to do. And this was a very small budget film. So oddly enough, the thing that I think is I'm most proud of is there's a scene early on in the story where Fiona O'Shea, who plays the young Samuel Beckett, shows up at a cafe and Joyce is inside that cafe. And we had no money to do this, so we had to do it with smoke and mirrors. And I had a very good assistant director who was very experienced. She'd worked on Babylon Berlin, which is a very extravagant German TV drama, very good one too. And so we managed to make that look kind of quite good with one horse and a few people running around and a dog. And so certain things on a low budget you get very pleased with because you think you pulled something up that looks much more expensive than it actually is. So I did enjoy putting that scene together because it kind of worked on the day and we had rain, a rain tower, which one we could afford. We had to keep moving it around this way and that way. But to pull that off on a minor, very small budget was quite. So that's to answer your question. That was the one when I thought, well, that actually looks surprisingly epic. My God, it looks like a proper movie, as opposed to it being 10 people being shifted around and recycled and all this stuff we had to do to make it feel like a big busy Parisian street and cafe exterior. So you get on a small budget, you get rewarded by those kind of things as much as anything else that you're doing.
Well, I'm paraphrasing here, but Akira Kurosawa was once asked how he shot his movie Ran a certain way, the aspect ratio. And he said, well, because if you were a quarter inch out of frame this way, you'd see an airport, and a quarter inch out of frame, you'd see something like that. So, you're
Well, in our
controlling
case,
everything.
it was a supermarket that you'd see if you went there, like literally 1 meter this way, you'd see a kind of ugly Hungarian supermarket. So yes, that's a very standard sort of issue for a filmmaker is what you have to exclude and your little window on the world that you've created and what's either side of it doesn't bear any scrutiny at all.
Well, to close this out and make it more tailored to the film, do you dance first and think later, or do you think first and dance later?
Well, would that I did. I'm definitely someone who agonizes before taking action. And the moral of the film is a good one. And it's a good one because dancing is kind of you're not thinking anymore. It's unintellectual. It's all physicality and it's all sensation and emotion and you're alive in a certain kind of way. If you think too much, then you're going to curdle that experience, particularly if you think too much beforehand. So until the film, I was definitely a think first, dance later kind of guy. I'm now trying to be more of a dance first, think later kind of guy. I'm not sure how well that's going because my character seems to be a think first, dance later kind of guy. But it's a good moral for us all, really.
Well, until that
How
time
about
that our
you? Let me,
kites.
let me ask you, are you a dance first or a think later kind of guy? Let's turn this around.
Well, I think it would have to be a think first because I imagine you're dealing with budgets that are, probably more than you can comprehend. So I'm in the hotel world, so I need to think first so that I know what I'm doing to communicate to the trades and the client. But when I go to the supermarket, I dance first and think
There
later.
you go. I guess it is a circumstantial thing, isn't it? You can dance first in a supermarket better than you can in your professional life.
Well, Mr. James Marsh, thank you for your time. Thank you for this film. I thoroughly, thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it. So
That's
everyone
great to
check
hear.
out Dance First, and we will catch you next time. Thank you, James.
Hello. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
You know this is going to be a journey through your shame. Isn't everything?